I want to introduce my dear colleague, Tyler, who is the John Loeb and Francis Lehman Loeb Professor of Epidemiology and Biostats at the School of Public Health. And he's also the director of the Human Flourishing Program, which Shine is very proud to be part of because we worked together a lot. So now we are physically together in this program. With that, I would like to turn it over to Tyler to say the business case for flourishing is really important. And over the years that we've worked together, all of the sites, organizations, populations that we work with are interested in, oh, well, what's the return of investment? Or is this really preventing other things down the road? And so it is. And that's what we're going to talk about, at least from our research that we've done together. Thank you so much, Tyler, for doing this.
Wonderful. Thank you, Eileen. And thank you all for being here today. As Eileen indicated, I will be presenting today on a business case for flourishing. I'll be restructuring my remarks essentially in three sections. First, I will talk a bit about the general flourishing framework we've been using at the Human Flourishing Program and with Shine, and some of the insights that have emerged from this more generally. Second, I will make a business case for flourishing, arguing that the promotion of flourishing has tremendous potential to contribute to work outcomes and the bottom line as well. And then third, if you think that evidence is compelling, I will talk about ways that businesses can improve and promote well-being amongst their employees, both at work but also in life more generally. And I very much believe that in turn will enhance business outcomes. So that'll be the plan. First, flourishing generally, then the business case for flourishing, and then what can be done to promote flourishing. So with regard to flourishing more broadly, our various institutions and our academic disciplines often aspire to grand visions of flourishing. My own discipline, public health, the World Health Organization's definition of health from 1948, still in place today, is that health is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. The discipline of economics is sometimes described as an attempt to study how agents go about maximizing their expected utility, supposedly taking into account all aspects of the agent's preferences. Positive psychology is sometimes described as the scientific study of the strengths that enable individuals and communities to thrive. But in practice, many of our discussions and studies and policy aims are often focused on much more restricted outcomes, specific disease states, or simple measures of feeling happier or income. They miss this grand vision of human flourishing. So what is flourishing? Well, if we turn to our dictionaries, the Oxford English Dictionary defines flourish as to grow or develop in a healthy or vigorous way. The American Heritage Dictionary, to do or fare well. The etymology of the term comes from Latin, florere, to bloom, blossom, flower. It's the word often used to translate Aristotle's eudaimonia, sometimes also translated as happiness. The working definition that we've been using at the Human Flourishing Program in collaboration with Shine is that flourishing or complete human well-being is living in a state in which all aspects of a person's life are good. So all encompassing, but this is arguably what we're seeking as individuals, and I think should be seeking as a society. And I do believe that businesses have a considerable role to play in doing so. At present, I think the discipline that's come closest to capturing some of this is that of positive psychology. Many conceptualizations and measures of well-being have been put forward, but notably absent from these measures of psychological well-being are typically any notion of physical health. And are we really fully flourishing if we're not physically healthy, if we're terribly ill or bedridden? Often missing, and I'll come back to this point because I do think it's relevant for the business context, is any notion of character. And this is really contrary to Plato or Aristotle, most of the Western philosophical tradition, and really cultural, philosophical, religious traditions worldwide. And as we'll see with some of the empirical data, important part in promoting work outcomes as well. But with kind of a conception so broad, if this is going to be all-encompassing, it is ever possible to really measure this. And surely notions of well-developed notions of flourishing will differ across persons and cultures and philosophical religious traditions. So what can we really do with regard to assessment and promotion? And well, I do think it's the case that well-developed understandings of flourishing are going to vary across traditions. I think it's also the case that any reasonable notion of flourishing would include the following 5 domains. Not that flourishing is reducible to these 5, but whatever else flourishing might include, it would include these 5 as well. And these are happiness and life satisfaction, physical and mental health, meaning and purpose, character and virtue, and close social relationships. Again, the argument's not that these exhaust flourishing, but I think each are a part of it. I think each of these 5 domains also satisfies the following 2 criteria. Each is nearly universally desired, and we have some empirical data now on this as well. And each is an end in of itself. It's sought for its own sake. It's not merely a means to some other end. So these are things people care about. These are things employees care about in their life. These are things that, as we'll discuss, businesses can help promote. And as we'll also see, these various aspects of flourishing, of well-being, in turn contribute to work outcomes. But I do think these 2 criteria, being nearly universally desired, being an end, can help begin to shape consensus around what to measure. So as a very crude measure of flourishing, we've taken 2 questions in each of these 5 domains, principally using questions drawn from the existing literature, questions that have received a fair bit of empirical validation and fairly widespread use. And so these 10 questions are as follows. First, in the happiness and life satisfaction domain, how satisfied are you with life as a whole these days? Self-rated from 0, completely unsatisfied, to 10, completely satisfied. And then supplementing that with something more effective on how one feels. In general, how happy or unhappy do you usually feel? 0, extremely unhappy, 10, extremely happy. Second domain, physical and mental health. These are just standard self-report health questions. From the US General Social Survey, the World Health Organization's mental health survey. So first, in general, how would you rate your physical health, 0 to 10? Second, how would you rate your overall mental health, 0 to 10? Third domain, meaning and purpose. First question, overall, to what extent do you feel the things you do in your life are worthwhile? 0, not at all worthwhile. 10, completely worthwhile. And this question, along with the first one on life satisfaction, are very widely used. They've been used in the UK's annual survey, by the OECD, by Gallup, many other cohort studies. So these are well-studied well-being questions. So activities, to what extent do you feel the things you do in your life are worthwhile? And then we supplement that with something more cognitive. I understand my purpose in life. 0, completely disagree. 10, completely agree. The fourth domain, character strengths. First question sort of oriented towards practical wisdom and justice. I always act to promote good in all circumstances, even in difficult and challenging situations. Rated 0, not at all true of me, to 10, completely true of me. And then second question oriented more towards fortitude and moderation. I'm always able to give up some happiness now for greater happiness later. And then our final domain, post-social relationships. These 2 questions were taken from the UK's Campaign to End Loneliness, a survey of short social connectedness instruments. First question, I'm content with my friendships and relationships, 0 to 10, kind of trying to get at the quantity of those relationships. And then second, my relationships are as satisfying as I would like them to be, oriented towards the quality of those relationships. So as a crude measure for flourishing, we'll sometimes aggregate all 10 questions, but usually we look at the domains separately, because as we'll see shortly, that dynamics can be quite different across the domains. And really the average of all 10 should be understood as nothing more than the average of those 5 more meaningful domains. We do typically supplement these 10 questions with 2 others on financial and material stability as important means to sustain those other ends. So we'll typically also ask these questions drawn from the financial well-being literature. How often do you worry about being able to meet normal monthly living expenses? 0, worry all the time. 10, do not worry at all. How often do you worry about safety, food, or housing? And so sometimes we'll average all 12 questions to form a more stable measure, secure measure of flourishing, maybe a little less satisfactory conceptually. Financial resources really are means, not ends, but arguably more satisfactory in practice and indicating flourishing over a longer period of time. So we've been collecting, as I'll talk about shortly, data on these questions in all sorts of workplace and other settings as well. But to give you some sense as to how these questions might work in practice, I do want to pause just for maybe 90 seconds and have you think through your own life. Go through these questions. Try to reflect on what's going well, what's not. Where might areas of change be possible? So it's a little more awkward on Zoom than in person, but I'll be quiet for about 90 seconds as you kind of think through these 10 questions. Okay, so I realize a minute and a half is not a great deal of time to ponder life, but hopefully this gives you some sense as to how these questions might work in practice. And when we've used this in workplace context, many people have come back with feedback that it's really helped them to think about their lives, changes they want to make. One woman, I think, decided to commit to volunteering after going through these and feeling greater purpose was missing and was needed. Many have expressed gratitude for being asked these sorts of questions. And as we'll see as I go through the empirical research a little bit later, these various aspects of flourishing really do matter to people and matter for work outcomes as well. I think these sorts of questions can also give insight into what's going well, what's not, who needs help and in what ways, and how are things changing over time. So before I move on to the business case for flourishing, I just want to give a couple of examples where we're simply collecting the data really has given some insight. So this is a flourishing assessment from a roughly nationally representative sample of the United States in January 2020, before the declaration of the COVID-19 pandemic, and then 6 months later in June 2020 amidst the pandemic. Prior to the pandemic, the average score in the United States across most of these domains was really about 7 out of 10. The exception was financial and material stability, about 6 out of 10 there. So somewhat lower, and we've seen this in a number of our samples. Those financial means are important to people, and many are struggling. Not surprisingly, the flourishing went down during the COVID-19 pandemic. But what was interesting here is that different domains were affected in different ways. Happiness and life satisfaction fell 0.7 of a point, perhaps not surprisingly. Physical and mental health fell 0.7 of a point, not too surprising. One of the largest falls was in financial and material stability, nearly a full point. But the other domains didn't alter quite as much. Meaning and purpose went down a little bit, but not as much as those others. Our character assessments were pretty much level. And somewhat surprisingly, the close social relationships domain went down a little bit, but not as much as would have anticipated. And this was corroborated by other evidence that had suggested that loneliness had gone up a bit, but not as dramatically as one might have expected. And so while this was certainly a difficult time for many people, for others, it helped them to focus perhaps on family, on those they were living with, to connect with relatives and friends via Zoom and other technologies. So again, this sort of analysis allows one to gain those insights. Importantly, however, these means can disguise variability. The variability across these dimensions, that's in the standard deviation column, went up. And so while for some this might have been a time to invest in family, for others, perhaps especially living alone, this was a really difficult time. And so we need to look at not just the averages, but also the distribution of flourishing. But again, just these descriptive analyses can give us insight into what's going well, what's not, and how things are changing over time. We continued to collect this data once a year. And by January of 2022, the flourishing scores had more or less returned to what they were in January of 2020, but a new pattern emerged. While they had returned to former levels on average, there was a pretty steep gradient with age. And the traditional patterns with age and well-being had historically been kind of U-shaped, with younger people and older people doing well, and those midlife, maybe struggling with young children and aging parents and career challenges, not reporting quite as high. But what started happening even before the pandemic, but was exacerbated by the pandemic, is that left part of the U was flattening. And by the end of 2021, early 22, it had flattened so much that each of these dimensions of well-being was strictly increasing with age. So this was pretty disturbing data to see. And again, I think likewise has business implications. I think young people now especially are interested in, is this place of employment going to enhance my well-being? Because they are suffering. They are suffering across these dimensions. This is a real motivating factor, but I think should also lead to reflection on the societal level. What can we do to support the well-being of young people? Few final comments, and then I'll move on to the business case more explicitly. But in some of our research, we've been trying to discern the major drivers of flourishing. What shapes population level flourishing? And if one approaches this question from the kind of public health perspective, we usually think of public health impact of an exposure, an intervention, or a phenomena as a function of two things. First, the prevalence of the exposure, how common is it? And secondly, the size of its effect. Something that's common in the population that has large effects is going to shape population health. So if we apply this lens to physical health, we're led to factors like exercise, nutrition, not smoking, sleep. But if we expand our lens yet further to ask not just what affects physical health, but what also affects happiness and mental health and meaning and character and social relationships, what's common and has large effects across these outcomes, the list looks rather different. And based on a systematic review of the literature, restricting to the most rigorous longitudinal studies, would propose four. And those are family, work, education, and religious community. Evidence from rigorous studies that each of these is relatively common in the population, both in the United States and worldwide, and each has relatively large effects across these flourishing domains. The argument here is not that these are exhaustive. Other pathways may have important effects, but be less common. Maybe deep engagement in the arts might affect all these various domains, but such deep engagement isn't particularly common in the population. But in any case, the argument's not that these are exhaustive, nor that they're all necessary. One can flourish even in the absence of one or more of these pathways. Rather, the argument is that each of these pathways powerfully affects flourishing and is common in the population. So if individual and policy efforts were made to enhance these pathways or to engage in these institutional pathways, population flourishing would increase. So I won't go through all the details on the methodology for this review. You can find it on our website or in this 2017 paper in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. But this little diagram here kind of summarizes the evidence. We have the four institutional pathways on the left, the five flourishing domains on the right, and those numbers on the arrows correspond to rigorous studies suggesting this sort of evidence. Importantly here, one of the central pathways, I think, to flourishing is work. the workplace has tremendous potential to enhance societal flourishing. So we've been collecting this sort of data on flourishing in a number of different settings in collaboration with Shine at Aetna, Kohler, Owens Corning, factory workers in Mexico, Poland, Sri Lanka, Cambodia, China, a group of international flight attendants, recently employees at Delta in various clinical settings, at Boston University, Johns Hopkins, University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, Florida Blue is now rolling this out fairly generally, various universities, secondary schools, communities, cohort studies, and a big global flourishing study that we are launching with Gallup. And some interesting patterns have emerged. These aren't necessarily universal, and these cross-cultural comparisons often need careful interpretation. But in many settings, not all, but in many settings, the financial and material stability domain is rated the lowest. Not everywhere. It was not the case with the Aetna sample, not the case in Denmark and Germany, but many samples it is. So those means are really critical. Second, social connectedness is often rated quite a bit higher in other countries than in the United States. So I think this should give us some pause as to are we focusing on the right things? Are we paying enough attention to these issues? In the West, at least, many of these dimensions are now increasing with age, which again I think indicates we need greater focus on the well-being of young people. And then lastly, quite intriguingly, perhaps unsurprisingly, levels of happiness and life satisfaction tend to be higher in richer developed countries than poor developing countries. And interestingly, the reverse is true with meaning and purpose. Meaning and purpose tends to be higher in poor developing countries than richer developed countries. So I think this leads to questions like how can we carry out economic development without compromising meaning and purpose? And again, what role might businesses play in that regard? To try to address some of these questions, we are launching a global flourishing study with Gallup. The study will be about 200,000 individuals in 22 different countries, representing about half the world's population, with nationally representative sampling in each country, and will follow the same group of 200,000 individuals once a year for 5 years. We've got about 190,000 responses to date. The data should be available and will be publicly available in January of 2024. So we're very excited to learn what else we might discern about the distribution and determinants of flourishing from this work. So with that, I want to transition now. After I've given this broad overview of our flourishing framework, I want to transition now to how these considerations are relevant for business. Again, first focusing on the evidence that if flourishing, employee flourishing were to increase, business outcomes would be improved. And then second, what can businesses do to promote flourishing, to promote well-being in the workplace? With regard to the business case itself, I'll focus on three arguments. First, the way that employee well-being affects work outcomes. Second, employee well-being and turnover. And third, employee well-being and healthcare costs and other costs, such as costs due to distraction. With regard to employee well-being and health outcomes, many businesses have wellness programs trying to support physical health, trying to reduce the number of sick days, and these can potentially be of some benefit. And physical health of the employees does indeed matter. But if we look at other aspects of well-being, we see in many cases these other aspects of well-being matter just as much or even more than does physical health. So this data comes from a sample of workers in Mexico, where we collected data with Shine over time and looked at how these different aspects of well-being in 1 year contributed to various work outcomes the next year, having controlled for those work outcomes at the beginning, as well as various other social, demographic, health-related factors. And so with job satisfaction, for example, if you take that as work outcome, you'll see physical health does contribute, but so do all of the other aspects of well-being. Happiness, purpose, character, social relationships contribute just about as much as does physical health, if what you're aiming at is employee job satisfaction. With regard to worker performance, again, physical health matters, but social relationships within the workplace matter even more, and life satisfaction and happiness for worker performance matter just about as much. Likewise, with work engagement, once again, physical health does matter, but character strengths matter just as much, if not more, than physical health with regard to work engagement. And with work injury, we found that it was, in fact, the character strengths domain, which was most strongly predictive of preventing work injury. So again, well-being of the employees can contribute to work outcomes. Similar results in the work we did with a group of employees at Aetna. Again, more rigorous design following individuals over time, looking at how various aspects of flourishing affected work distraction, productivity, and job satisfaction. Pretty big effects on all outcomes for emotional health and also for social connectedness. Both of those: decreased job distraction, increased productivity, increased job satisfaction. So important places to focus. Meaning and purpose and character strengths did less for job satisfaction, but more for work distraction and productivity. Sort of some effects of financial security on job satisfaction. You're paid well, happier. But really these other dimensions of well-being, emotional health, character strength, social connectedness, meaning and purpose are what's driving these improvements in well-being outcomes. So if we invest in employee well-being, and I'll come back to strategies to do so, work outcomes will improve as well. Data I'm presenting here is a meta-analysis using data from Gallup. This is others' work, not our own, but this was a sample of about 1.8 million employees. The data here is a little bit more complicated insofar as it's cross-sectional. So while one sees pretty substantial negative correlations between well-being and turnover, those who are happy are less likely to leave, there are still complications with regard to, is that because if you're happy you don't quit your job, or is that because those who are thinking about quitting their jobs become unhappy? Unlike the other evidence I presented, we can't quite sort that out definitively here with this study because it's cross-sectional, but the evidence does seem to at least point to the likely possibility, and it's maybe not surprising, that when employees have higher levels of well-being, they're less likely to leave. And that was the case across different sectors, from finance to services to retail to manufacturing. So again, a bit more evidence is perhaps needed here to definitively make the case, but it looks like employee well-being leads to lower rates of turnover. And then, a third possible argument that I think can be quite compelling is employee well-being reduces costs to the company, healthcare costs and other costs due to the distraction, for example. So one study work done in Denmark showed that flourishing in 2016 was associated with significantly lower healthcare costs, about $700 a year per employee, than sort of lower levels of flourishing. And this was after controlling for those healthcare costs at baseline as well. Likewise, lower levels of sickness benefit transfers. You combine the two, you're about $1,000 per year per employee if we can get well-being to higher levels. Also, I'll present this evidence in greater detail in a few slides, but work that the SHINE team, along with the Human Flourishing Program, carried out has indicated that the costs to businesses for distraction are really quite substantial, much higher, in fact, than for sick days. And so I'll be presenting evidence that efforts to improve flourishing and well-being can, in fact, enhance work engagement, can decrease work distraction. And this would likewise could potentially lead to fairly substantial cost savings. So I do think employee well-being contributes to work outcomes, reduces turnover, and reduces costs. If one accepts those premises, that still leads to the question: well, what can be done? How might we enhance employee well-being? And I'm going to propose 5 strategies, which I think are all relatively low cost. I mean, some of these is effectively free. Everything, of course, takes time. Nothing's entirely free, but relatively low cost strategies to improve employee well-being. So I'll go through 5 strategies. First, measuring well-being. Second, improving flourishing and life of the employees. Improving flourishing at work for the employees. Various top-down managerial approaches to improving well-being, and then working towards creating a flourishing culture. So I'll take these one at a time. I think one thing that can be done, and that we've been trying to do with in our work with SHINE, is to simply measure employee well-being. Ask these 12 questions on Flourishing. How are employees doing? What's going well? What's not? Who needs help? How are these things changing over time? We don't know what needs to be addressed or fixed or who needs help until we start measuring it. And as I think kind of showed with other examples at the national level, I think new insights can potentially emerge, just as was the case, for example, with age and well-being insights, which might help businesses make decisions well and to serve their employees to improve well-being. I do think the simple act of measurement, in fact, also constitutes an intervention of sorts. I think what we measure shapes what we discuss, what we know, what we aim for, policies put in place to improve it. So the very act of measurement actually changes the conversation. I think this is captured very nicely in Hefferman's phrase, we treasure what we measure. So when we start measuring something, we actually start paying attention to it. So I think the simple act of measurement, of collecting data, can give insights, but also begins to change the conversation. So the first thing I think that can and should be done is measuring employee flourishing. Secondly, I think the workplace is not unique in this regard, but I think the workplace is an important forum to disseminate evidence-based well-being activities. I think educational settings, universities, schools are another place where these activities could be disseminated. But there's rigorous evidence from randomized trials that various easy, do-it-yourself activities and interventions can improve different aspects of well-being. So it is an example of these kind of gratitude exercises, things like 3 times a week, write down 3 things you're thankful for and why. That's been shown to have effects over time on increased happiness, better self-reported health, lower depressive symptoms, better sleep, even 6 months out. And so again, just sort of encouraging employees to engage in these, have a gratitude day where these sorts of activities are disseminated, I think could make a difference. Likewise, another simple one is acts of kindness activities. For 6 weeks, once a week, choose a single day to do 5 acts of kindness, which you wouldn't otherwise do. And do this once a week for 6 weeks. And randomized trials, again, indicating effects of this versus some neutral activity on happiness, on greater engagement, on lower anxiety symptoms, on greater sense of connectedness. Moreover, there's evidence from other studies that these acts of kindness tend to spread. So begin to create a healthier, a happier, and more kind work climate. So again, you wouldn't necessarily need to have these activities be taking place every day, but maybe once a season, and focus on a specific well-being activity. Try to encourage employees to take this on, say that they're evidence-based, point to the evidence. And again, the evidence very clearly indicates that these simple activities improve well-being. Another one, maybe especially conducive to workplace context, is imagining one's best possible self. Exercise here is a little bit more involved, but it's kind of think about what your life would look like if 10, 15 years from now, everything went really well. Think about that with regard to your work, with regard to your relationships, with regard to your other pursuits. Write about what that life would look like and about steps to try to get there. And again, randomized trials indicating that this sort of activity increases happiness, optimism, sense of flow at work and elsewhere. So again, I think the implementation of these activities has the potential to enhance employee well-being, to go on to in turn affect work outcomes. I've summarized some of these and other activities in this paper here, which you can download from the Human Flourishing Program website, Activities for Flourishing, an evidence-based guide. We also have a free Flourishing app, which can be used and distributed to carry this out. But I do think kind of trying to get employees to improve their own well-being is one, and the second potential path to improving employee well-being. But then there's more that's really specific to the workplace, to focusing on flourishing at work. And one activity in that regard, which I think the evidence suggests can be very helpful, is practice of job crafting. This is sort of a bottom-up approach to improving well-being in the workplace. But the basic idea is to spend a little time thinking about three things: how my work and tasks can be carried out more efficiently, how I can improve my relationships in the workplace, who to say hello to or to inquire about on my way in, for example, and finding meaning, connecting one's own tasks with the overarching vision goal of the company, the products and services that are contributing, how this is making a difference to humanity. So it's just spending a bit of time reflecting on these three things. But this can be carried out by anyone in the company, from sort of the janitor to the CEO. It's really a bottom-up approach. It could be, this sorts of practices could be encouraged. And the evidence suggests that these job crafting practices, in addition to potentially improving relationships and finding meaning, also help with work engagement. Meta-analysis summarizing all the evidence from the literature indicated a slightly more than a third of an increase in standard deviation in work engagement when employing these job crafting practices. That's sort of like a move from the 50th percentile of work engagement to the 65th percentile. And so, these various aspects of job crafting, relationships, meaning, I think all do matter for job engagement and for distraction. And as I indicated earlier, the cost of distraction can be pretty substantial. And studies carried out with Shine of using data from a U.S. manufacturing company, $6 billion in revenue. The survey itself was of about 3,000 employees, looking at distraction, sick days income, and so on. And the estimate from this study was that the cost per year due to sick days was about 16 million, not insubstantial, but the cost due to distraction was about 300 million, massively larger. Similar results, in fact, with a sample of Polish factory workers, where the costs due to distraction were estimated as 5 times higher. Is that due to absenteeism? So distraction, work engagement matters. These job crafting practices, I think, really can make a difference. So again, third approach would be to improve well-being in the workplace, specifically on work tasks, using these practices of job crafting. So thus far, I've focused mostly on the individual employee, but management is of course relevant as well. The structure of companies do matter, and there are things that can be done there as well. With regard to kind of the evidence itself, one study, the Work, Family, and Health study, was a randomized trial. So again, very rigorous evidence here on efforts to promote family supportive supervisory behaviors and employee control. This randomized trial was carried out with 2 separate samples, IT workers and 700 long-term healthcare facility workers. But they found when organizations took on these practices of more family supportive supervisory behaviors and allowing a bit more control over schedules to accommodate family demands, there were effects on employee well-being, on sleep, on control over schedule, on subjective sense of control over schedule, and on better and more family time. But all of this was accomplished without reducing total work hours, and without the employees feeling that their job demands were increasing. So pretty beneficial effects here. They put together toolkits. If you search Work, Family, and Health study, you can find these toolkits to implement these sorts of practices elsewhere. I think the workplace also, at sort of the initiative of management, can be a forum for other aspects of improved well-being also. I think the workplace can provide opportunities for friendships and social connectedness, potentially for volunteering. To one CEO who said they would give employees a full week of additional paid time off if they devoted that to volunteering activities. But he felt that this led to greater meaning and much greater productivity amongst the employees. So again, there are these sorts of top-down approaches from management which can contribute to well-being. Another total evidence comes from helping employees with debt restructuring, which is a problem for many. But if the company steps in and helps with that debt restructuring to alleviate some of the pressure to get lower interest rates for employees who have debt, that can make a big difference. One organization felt it was what they did company-wide was effectively the equivalent of 2 full call centers in terms of the increased productivity that they estimated from that restructuring. So there are things that management can, and I think should do. And again, these things will enhance employee well-being and consequently go on to enhance work outcomes as well. So that's kind of the 4th strategy I'm putting forward. And then the 5th is working towards trying to create a flourishing culture and a fair bit of our empirical work, and using a psychological caring climate assessment developed at Shine, with kind of 5 or 6 different questions assessing whether employees feel that management truly cares about them, whether safety is a priority, whether employees feel respected at work, whether they trust management, whether they feel they're treated fairly, and whether management's able to deal with stressful situations. And our empirical research, again, more rigorous research, longitudinal over time, looking at how that psychological caring climate at work affects work outcomes later on, controlling for those same work outcomes at baseline. So we're really trying to get at evidence for causal effects, indicated that caring psychological climate was relevant for an increased self-reported productivity, self-reported work quality, levels of work engagement, and levels of job satisfaction. So again, the climate, the culture does matter. It matters arguably in and of itself. Want the workplace to be good and well functioning, but it matters also for employee well-being and for work outcomes, as we've seen here. So again, if we turn to this question of what can be done in the workplace to improve employee well-being, five possible approaches. I think ideally all would be implemented. But first, measure well-being to figure out what's going well, what's not, who needs help, and in what ways, and to change the conversation. Second, improve flourishing in life. Distribute well-being activities. Have one quarter a gratitude day, the next quarter an acts of kindness day, the third quarter imagining best possible self, the next one maybe job crafting practices, and so on. But improve, give employees resources to improve their own well-being. That'll be good for them in and of themselves, but also will go on to improve work outcomes. And then likewise, try to improve their flourishing at work, their sense of job engagement. And these job crafting practices, I think, can be especially helpful in that regard, can help employees do their tasks more efficiently, find more meaning at work, have better relationships at work. And that will, again, in turn, affect both employee well-being, but also work outcomes, lower job distraction, lower costs due to job distraction. Fourth, management approaches, try to structure things so that there is a bit more control with regard to family demands, also opportunities in the workplace for social connection, for volunteering, for healthier financial life, and so on. And last, create that caring, flourishing culture in the workplace, where there is respect, where people are treated fairly, where management cares not just about the bottom line, but their employees as well. I think that could have a transformative effect on employee well-being, and consequently, again, on work outcomes as well. So in conclusion, I really do think people care deeply about flourishing. They care about income and they care about physical health. There's no doubt, and that's been the focus, I think, of most workplace settings and thinking about employment. Those are critical, but people care about more than that. They care about being happy. They care about having a sense of meaning and purpose, about trying to do good, about their relationships. And so I do think there are things businesses can do to invest in these other aspects of flourishing as well. This is important for its own sake. I think one can also make a moral case for promoting well-being in the workplace, but it's important for business outcomes as well, for work outcomes. A business case can be made for improving flourishing. We've seen there are things that can be done, these 5 different strategies, and so I think it's important that we start measuring flourishing and taking it seriously and finding various ways to try to improve it. So that concludes my presentation. Thank you all again for being here, and happy to take any comments or questions. Thank you again.
If there are any questions, just unmute and ask.
I have a question, Tyler.
Yeah.
Good morning, good evening, everybody. I'm Enrique Tamés from Tecnológico Monterrey. Tyler, we are using right now your survey of 12 questions in the university. We have applied it to a little bit above 5,000 students and 2,000 employees. We added 2 questions. We are convinced at Tec de Monterrey that to talk about Flourish, it's also not only about the person, not only about the community, but also about the planet. We need to make the planet flourish. So we added a couple of questions about our relation with the planet. If we're concerned about our planet, about an environmental surrounding. What do you think about this? Do you think that we should start measuring also our relation, not only with ourselves, with our community, but also with our planet?
Yeah, no, I very much think that is important as well. My focus here was on kind of individual aspects of flourishing and well-being, but I think looking not just at the individual, but at the also at the communal and at the planetary, the global aspects as well is critical. And in a lot of my speaking and a lot of my writing, I'll use the terms flourishing and well-being effectively, interchangeably, as I think do many people. But in some of our more careful, nuanced work, we'll distinguish between those, in fact, and sort of we'll sometimes describe well-being as sort of a state in which all aspects of a person's life are good as they pertain to that individual. That's well-being. It's sort of individually focused. Whereas flourishing, I think, is all aspects of a person's life are good, including the context, communities, and environments in which they live. I think there's the connotation of the word flourishing is more closely connected with a certain consonance with the environment and the context. That context and environment is actually conducive to the flourishing, to the blossoming, to the well-being of the individual. So in a corrupt environment, one might say that someone's attained a certain level of well-being, but you wouldn't say they were fully flourishing because the environment, the community around them was not good. And so I do think it's important we pick up on these other things. So in our work with in the Global Flourishing Study, in addition to looking at these various aspects of individual well-being, we're also looking at broader societal and communal and environmental determinants as well. We're going to be employing Dennis Snower's SAGE framework. He's done quite a bit of work with the G20, but SAGE, each letter of that stands for a different aspect of that more communal, collective. S is solidarity, the extent to which there's a common shared trust and belonging together and joint pursuit. A is agency. To what extent is the government and political context empowering individuals? G is economic gain. And so, the economy does matter. Well-being is not simply a matter of just the individual, but the broader context, the broader economic system enabling that. And then E is the environment. And is the environment such that it can sustain human life? So I think each of those other aspects of flourishing, these kind of contextual constituents of flourishing or drivers of flourishing are really important as well, including the environment. So, as I indicated, I would never say our 5 or 6 domains in any way exhausts what constitutes flourishing, and in our empirical work, we're supplementing those 12 questions with this SAGE framework. But I think if one is beginning with the individual, those 12 questions are not a bad place to begin. But I would be fully supportive of further data collection and asking additional questions. I don't think any flourishing assessment is ever going to capture everything. The very notion of flourishing being all-encompassing will mean that we're always missing something. But again, I think one has to start somewhere. But I'm fully in favor of supplementing these questions with others, including questions on the environment.
Thank you, Enrique, for that question. Who would like to ask a question next? Or comment? Anyone?
I would
So
just Okay, go ahead,
No,
Karen.
no, I was trying to figure out how to raise my hand. So thank you very much for being with us this morning. One thing that's been certainly on my mind is the role of expectations and unmet expectations. So humans are expecting to be happy in a way that I don't ever remember my parents expecting to be happy. I think social media feeds into this. And as a manager, I feel that I'm always chasing after these unrealistic expectations about what work should be, in part because maybe folks aren't finding their expectations met in other places. So how do researchers like you sort of norm to the fact that people's expectations have fundamentally changed and yet the questions remain the same? Thank you very much.
Yeah, no, so I would say two things. First, I mean, and you touched upon this in your comment and question already, but I think while work is important, while work is, I believe, a driver of flourishing, I do think too much weight is sometimes put upon the workplace as being what is the primary venue for flourishing, and asking too much of it. Often people feel the whole of their meaning and purpose needs to come from their work, and I think that's too great of a burden to place on work. I think work's a major contributor. I think the empirical studies indicate that, but I think there are others, like the family, like religious community, like education, and continuing to learn. Each of these things also supports various aspects of flourishing, of well-being. So I think if people are using or trying to use work for the whole of their human fulfillment, that will fail. And so I think that needs to be made clear. So yes, work can contribute. Yes, work does contribute, but can't sustain the whole of the burden. The second thing I would point to, because you touched specifically on happiness, which I think is correct. People have very high expectations now of being happy. But I think one of the things the Flourishing framework contributes is that flourishing is more than just happiness. Happiness is important. Happiness is a component of it. But there's more to life than feeling happy. People will sometimes sacrifice some degree of happiness and life satisfaction to pursue an important goal or purpose, or for the sake of an important relationship. And so I think the Flourishing framework begins to change expectations, that the goal in life is not just maximization of happiness. These other aspects of flourishing matter as well. And then with that framing, with that framework, one can actually, I think, more easily make sense of struggles and difficulties and even suffering, challenges in the workplace, which maybe aren't making one happy, may provide opportunity for character growth, for example. Working through a challenging relationship and the workplace may not make one happy, but may enhance the quality of that relationship over time, long term. When there's real difficulty at work and long hours and it's miserable, but the goal itself is worthy, then working through those struggles, even if one is unhappy, can give one a greater sense of purpose. So I think the Flourishing framework helps alter somewhat, at least, expectations, insofar as it says happiness matters, but happiness is not all that matters, and work can contribute to other aspects of flourishing beyond happiness. So those are the two things I would point to: not placing too much burden on the workplace, some, but not too much. And then secondly, let's expand from happiness to flourishing. Let's put happiness in its proper place. Part of flourishing, but not the whole of flourishing. And there are other things we should be seeking as well if what we're after is human fulfillment.
Thank you, Karen. Anybody else? I know, Eileen, you had a comment. Anyone else want to jump
Yes.
in?
Hello. May I
Hello?
ask a question? Yes. My
Yes.
name is Ricard Casas from Barcelona, Spain. I know that the subject of today's talk is the case for well-being of flourishing in the workplace, but to what extent do you think that well-being, general well-being, should be the ultimate measure of a society's success, as opposed to the growth of GDP, which is what seems to be the case at the moment.
Yeah, no, I mean, I would strongly prefer if policy were shaped around well-being rather than just GDP. I don't think GDP is irrelevant. I think the economic structures, I think economic growth is important, and we've seen in many samples that financial and material stability is what many people are struggling with. So I would never want to downplay the role of economic development in GDP. But the notion that GDP is all we care about, I think, is completely flawed. A car crash can increase GDP because we need to build another car. It's a reasonable measure, but it's a crude measure, and it's a measure really oriented towards the economy. So I think a more adequate approach would be something like, yes, look at individual well-being, use these flourishing assessments, or use some other well-being assessment. Look at individual well-being, but then supplement that as well with the communal and the societal structural elements, or the contextual constituents of flourishing, things like solidarity, agency, economics, GDP. Yes, it's part of it, not the whole of it, but part of it, and the environment. Again, I think even that's not going to capture everything that's relevant, but it'll give us a more complete picture. So I do think there's a real challenge between kind of balancing this notion that flourishing is all-encompassing and includes everything versus, well, we need a discrete set of measures to really do adequate assessment and evaluation and policy prioritization. And I think it's not a straightforward question. I mean, there are a group of economists, especially in the UK, and they've made some real progress advocating for replacing GDP with life satisfaction. And I think their view is that if we're going to replace GDP, we need one measure. People can't handle more, and so life satisfaction is where we should go. And if one's going to do a single question, I think something like life satisfaction, life evaluation, Cantrell's ladder, it's not a bad one. But I'm hesitant to say that's all we should do. We should only look at life satisfaction. First, because I think we miss out important nuances, like the fact that, yes, life satisfaction is higher in richer developed countries, but meaning and purpose is lower in richer developed countries. I mean, do we really want to say, well, we don't care about that? I'd be very hesitant to make that sort of claim. Likewise, people's decisions are not based entirely on maximizing their time integrated level of life satisfaction. As I indicated earlier, people will make decisions which they know will lower their life satisfaction because of an important purpose, something they want to contribute to the world, or because of an important relationship. So I just don't think it's how human decision making really works. So what do we do? Well, I mean, I do think sort of a smaller, consolidated set of measures might be the right way forward from a policy perspective. From a research perspective, we can take into account as best we can the full richness of measures and aspects. Policy, I do think, is more complicated, but I do think something like that SAGE framework, looking at the contextual drivers of solidarity, agency, economic gain, and the environment, and supplementing that also with maybe a summary measure of individual flourishing or well-being, not just life satisfaction, but those other aspects as well. I think people can sort of keep 4 or 5 measures or numbers in mind. Maybe not 20 or 50, but 4 or 5, I think is not unreasonable. So my thinking on these questions continues to evolve, but that's I'd say where I'm at present, that we do need to displace GDP. GDP is a part of it, but it's not the whole thing. But we need to replace it not just with life satisfaction, but with a range of both contextual and individual aspects of flourishing.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Ricard. Any others as we wrap up? Eileen, did you want to?
I just wanted to say I was writing so much down, including the comments, which are very thoughtful and deep. And I hope we can continue this conversation in another session in the future. There's also some good questions and comments in the chat, so please take notice. And thank you for this community of thought. And thank you, Tyler, for your leadership in Flourishing. And everyone have a flourishing day. We're going to be posting this recording so you can think about it even deeper next time.
Pleasure being with you all. Thank you again. And thank you all for your efforts to promote Flourishing as well.